Hi, it's Patrick Hutzel from IntensiveCareHotline.com, where we instantly improve the lives of families of critically ill patients in intensive care, so that you can have peace of mind, real power, real control, and so that you can influence decision making fast, even if you're not a doctor or a nurse in intensive care. This is another episode of Your Questions Answered, and in last week's episode I answered another question from one of our readers, and the question last week was: what happens if my critically ill loved one can't be weaned off the ventilator? You can check out the answer to last week's question by clicking on the link below this video. In this week's episode of Your Questions Answered, I want to answer another question from one of our readers, and the question this week is from Amanda in the United States, and Amanda asks: my loved one has HIV, lymphoma on his brain, seizures, is septic and is ventilated. The intensive care team is trying to take my hope away and they're all negative. Help. Amanda writes: hi Patrick, I wanted to reach out to you about a loved one who is critically ill in intensive care. My loved one is dealing with HIV. He was admitted to the hospital 3 times since September with different infections. The first time he got admitted, he had sepsis and he was treated with various antibiotics. He stayed in intensive care for a few days and was moved to a regular ward. He was in the hospital for 2 weeks and then discharged. I had to bring him back to the emergency room less than a week later. He was admitted to a regular room and stayed in the hospital for a month. He was aggressively treated with antibiotics for bacteria and started HIV medication. He was also diagnosed with lymphoma on his brain. He was doing much better after a few weeks, but he had edema and some bladder control issues when he left the hospital. He was supposed to be starting chemotherapy for lymphoma within a week or 2. He was still being treated with antibiotics through a PICC line and taking his medication. He was only home for a week and I had to bring him back to the emergency room last Tuesday. He was awake and breathing when he went to the emergency room, but this time they put him on a breathing machine and sedated him. He was sent to the intensive care unit. There they said that he had bacteria all in his body and in his brain. Although I know that his immune system is very weak, I don't understand how he got these other infections so quickly. He had 2 spinal taps while at the hospital. They took his blood work every day and they did all types of procedures. I don't understand how they didn't notice these other infections or why he was discharged before all the infection was gone. He's not receiving any sedation medicine, but he's still not waking up. He also had a few seizures, which he is receiving medicine for. I had a meeting with some of his doctors, and I was told that he was critically ill. They wanted to know what myself and his family would want to do if his heart stops beating. I have been praying for him every day, and I will only believe in positive outcomes. I understand that he's very ill, but I don't think it's impossible for him to pull through. I called the social worker this morning about something else, and she said that he developed full-blown AIDS and his body will not be able to fight off the infection and he will not recover. She claimed that she wasn't trying to be mean, but I feel like, why would she say that? She's not a doctor and she's not God. I understand that my loved one is very ill, but I feel like people are trying to take my hope away. I have been very sad and scared about everything that's going on, and I feel so lost. I want to take things one day at a time because I feel like he will improve. Thank you, Amanda. Hi Amanda, thank you for reaching out. I'm very sorry to hear that your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. It sounds like you and your critically ill loved one are in an extremely difficult and challenging situation. First of all, I want to encourage you to stay positive. Don't let anybody take away your courage of staying positive whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. You can also check out this related article or related video, How to Stay Positive if your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. You can check out this blog post and video below the video in a link. Staying positive is half of the battle, even if the outcome isn't going to be a desired outcome, and I'll explain why in a minute. Let's now quickly look at the clinical facts from what you are describing. Your critically ill loved one has HIV, and you need to know that many people live with HIV for decades without any symptoms. My experience in more than 15 years intensive care nursing in 3 different countries, where I have literally worked with thousands of critically ill patients and their families, has shown me that HIV patients can overcome an intensive care stay as well. Generally speaking, HIV, critical illness and intensive care are not a good combination, however it can be overcome. What concerns me, however, is that your critically ill loved one is on the ventilator, had seizures, and is on no sedation and is still not waking up. Unfortunately, you haven't given me any information as to how long your critically ill loved one has been ventilated for and for how long he hasn't had any sedation for. If your critically ill loved one had bacteria in his brain, this could well have led to the seizures. However, I can't diagnose that from afar. The CT scans and or MRIs would most likely have the answer to that. I also think it's a good strategy to take things one day at the time. I can also see that your optimism is challenged by the intensive care team asking you what yourself and his family want if his heart stops beating. Now, you need to know and understand that intensive care teams can be very quick at painting a doom and gloom picture, especially in light of the fact that a recovery of your critically ill loved one could take a long time, if a recovery is possible at all. You need to know and understand that often the positioning the intensive care team takes in the following situations, where critically ill patients are either very unstable and in a very critical condition, or they may be in a life-threatening situation, or they may be in intensive care for long-term treatments and long-term stays, or they may be having a severe or traumatic head or brain injury, or critically ill patients might be threatened with an NFR, not for resuscitation, or DNR, do not resuscitate order. Or critically ill patients are in a situation where the intensive care team suggests a withdrawal of treatment or a limitation of treatment as being quote-unquote in the best interest of a critically ill patient. Or they might even be approaching their end of life in intensive care. The intensive care team's positioning is more often than not a reflection of what's happening behind the scenes in intensive care of those aforementioned situations. What's happening behind the scenes in intensive care is so powerful that critically ill patients' fate and destiny can be decided behind closed doors and can be presented and quote-unquote sold to families of critically ill patients in intensive care as quote-unquote being in the best interest of their critically ill loved one. You can also check out this related article here, the 3 things you didn't know that are happening behind the scenes whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care, but you must know if you want to have peace of mind, control, power and influence. Check out this article by clicking on the link below this video. Now Amanda, in reality, the financial interests the bed management pressures, staffing issues, politics, medical research interests, the dynamics, the power play and power struggles, the competing interests, the intrigue, and the psychology in intensive care is what's driving the intensive care team's agenda and ultimately your critically ill loved one's fate and destiny if you are ill prepared. Your job therefore is to develop an awareness that this is what you are dealing with and then embark on a journey that gives you peace of mind, control, power and influence, irrespective of the challenges that you are currently facing. You mustn't be intimidated by the perceived power and the perceived authority of the intensive care team. Once you know and understand the forces that you are up against, you then still need to stay strong and positive. That's extremely important. Even if your critically ill loved one is inevitably approaching his end of life in intensive care, you still want to have the end of life situation on your terms and not on the intensive care team's terms. You want to be realistic, however you also don't want to play the intensive care team's games of doom and gloom if you think that your critically ill loved one will recover. From what you are describing clinically, the odds might be against your critically ill loved one. However, you know him best and you know how resilient he may be and how he deals with challenges and adversity. I also believe from what you are describing, Amanda, that neither the intensive care team nor the social worker take your emotional situation into consideration. The language they use is most likely not appropriate for the situation that you are in, and they need to show more compassion. In the meantime, do what feels right for you. You don't want your critically ill loved one suffering unnecessarily. However, you do need to stand your ground irrespectively. By now, you know that you are in a once-in-a-lifetime situation and you don't want to get a once-in-a-lifetime situation wrong. I hope that helps, Amanda. I can also be available for a free 15-minute Skype consultation. Please let me know if you have any more questions. So, how can you have peace of mind, control, power and influence whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care? You get to that all-important feeling of peace of mind, control, power and influence when you download your free Instant Impact Report now by entering your email below. In your free Instant Impact Report, you learn quickly how to get peace of mind, real power and real control, and how you can influence decision making fast whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. Your free Instant Impact Report gives you in-depth insight that you must know whilst your loved one is critically ill or is even dying in intensive care. Sign up and download your free Instant Impact Report now by entering your email below. In your free Instant Impact Report, you learn how to speak the secret intensive care language so that the doctors and the nurses know straight away that you are an insider and that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care. In your free report, you will also discover how to ask the doctors and the nurses the right questions. Discover the many competing interests in intensive care and how your critically ill loved one's treatment may depend on those competing interests. How to eliminate fear, frustration, stress, struggle and vulnerability even if your loved one is dying. You get 5 killer tips and strategies helping you to get on the right path to peace of mind, control, power and influence in your situation. You'll get real-world examples that you can easily adapt to your and your critically ill loved one's situation. How to stop being intimidated by the intensive care team and how you will be seen as equals. You will get crucial behind the scenes insight so that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care and how you need to manage doctors and nurses in intensive care, and it's not what you think. Thank you for tuning into this week's Your Questions Answered, and I'll see you again in another update next week. Make sure you also check out our blog section for more tips and strategies, or send me an email to support@intensivecarehotline.com with your questions. This is Patrick Hutzel from intensivecarehotline.com, and I'll see you again next week in another update.